You're listening to Binder. I'm your host, Ray McManus. All right, well, we are back again for another exciting episode of Binder. Me, Ray McManus, and, producer Drew is somewhere in this building. He's right here in front of me. I think today, and that's perfect, that I wasn't paying attention, and I almost missed him. That's an important aspect for us to talk about, because today we're going to talk about taking our time. Drew, let's take our time.
Okay, Ray.
Not that much time.
Okay. Well, how about this much time? This episode is a little different from what we've been doing lately. Usually we're here to talk about an exhibition that's on view or some kind of programs we have going on or something like that. This is really us more discussing like a museum topic that has been talked about a lot. So, probably over 20 years ago now. This was a new study when I started at the museum, and that really tells you how long I've been working in museums. But the Metropolitan Museum of Art did this very famous study that really centered around how long people look at a certain piece of art, right? And the median time that they eventually came up to was 17 seconds, which isn't very long. But, that's been debated. Some people think it's closer to 30. Some people say it's as short as 15. Honestly, either way, I feel like that's really not a long time to look at any piece of art.
Well, I mean, it would be hard to gauge as an average anyway, right? Because, I mean, most of the time, what stops us to look at, is something that just attracts our eye.
Right.
If it doesn't, I could see us stop and look at, and then moving on. But if it was something that, grabbed us for whatever reason, maybe we spend 27 seconds there.
Yeah. I mean, you probably spent 27 seconds explaining that to me just now.
Which is a record for me.
Yeah, it's usually closer to 45 to a minute. How long do you usually spend with like a piece of art? Like when you're going to look at art, do you think you're in the 17-second range? Or do you think?
No, not at all. I think I'm spending several minutes at each piece, and longer if things are starting to come to me and ideas are starting to come, and I want to start writing some of that down. And then what I'll also do, and especially here when I go through the galleries, I'll go all the way through the contemporary and then work my way back in reverse, because I don't know, there's just something about a different perspective. And so I might have spent 2 or 3 minutes on one piece, but when I come back through the second time around, you would think they would be shorter. I find that I end up spending longer with the pieces when I come back through the second time. But that's just me, and that's something I think that is kind of around my writing process too.
Yeah.
But I just think we're just going to miss so much, right?
Right. Well, there's this thing that I've heard referred to multiple times in the museum field, and they call it museum fatigue, which is just, you spend hours in this space and you start to get tired, your feet hurt, you want to sit down, you want to go eat lunch. You're just zoning out. You're not really taking anything in. And I think one of the best ways to combat that is not to feel like you have to be checking off a list. Right. I think a lot of people, they go to a museum and they feel like they have to see every single piece and really like take it all in, because I paid money to be here. Like I got to make sure like I get my money's worth or whatever. But I feel like that's like maybe the wrong way to approach it. If I go to another museum, I do not make an effort to hit every gallery.
Right.
Because I just think it's, it's kind of a futile effort, like to a certain degree. Like I try to pick a few pieces that I'm really going to spend some time with, and then like go to a couple of galleries and take those in. And when I'm done, and I can always come back,
Right.
And like everyone's going to approach it differently. And I'm saying that what I do is right and what other people do is wrong. But I just think we rush through everything in life already. Like, why do we need to rush through something that is supposed to be for our enjoyment?
Yeah, right. I think you're right. I remember being in the AI in Chicago and knew there was no way I was going to see everything, and even if I did, it was just going to be a glance. I mean, because we only had so much time. I couldn't spend 3 days there. I was there for something else, for a conference, but I specifically wanted to see a few pieces there, and so on my way to finding them, I found other little treasures that I didn't think that I would see along the way. But I didn't see all of that museum, and all that makes me want to do is go back again and hopefully see other parts of it, because it is a cool area of Chicago and stuff like that. So there's a lot to be said for that, this idea that When we encounter art, there's supposed to be some finality to that. Like, I've seen it, therefore I don't need to see it again. Or I saw it in the time it took me to walk by, and I walked by really slowly. What else do you want me to do with it? I can't interact with it. I can't touch it, can't lick it. So, what else is there to do? And I could see the fatigue set in, but I think if we get out of the mindset of, I start here at point A, and I've got to get to point B, and I'd like to get this wrapped up in about 2 hours, then, you're going to get something out of it, but you're not going to get the full experience of it, of taking your time, walking through. Maybe you didn't finish it in the hour and a half that you allotted yourself. Then come back later.
Yeah.
Spend even more time. Go back over the pieces you've already looked at. I mean, that's so there is no one and done when it comes to art.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's why you're like the best partner to have a conversation about this with, because I feel like you really understand and appreciate the value and like deep reading and deep looking and looking at something for a long time and trying to find the different aspects and elements of it that make it interesting to you. Because, I mean, you do ekphrastic poetry, which really leans directly into that. Like, without really like deep looking at these paintings or these pictures or photos or whatever, making work that responds to it would be really hard, or let me use your phrasing, dare I say, impossible. But no, I think it would be really challenging to be able to form like some kind of creative reaction to something if you weren't like taking your time with it. Like when you're doing ekphrastic poetry, like we're gonna play through a scenario here, right? Mm-hmm. Talk through kind of what your analysis process would be when you're getting started. You decide you want to make a poem based on this painting. Mm-hmm. What are you thinking about?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you've got to get your mind ready before you even engage in that process. If I walk into a gallery open-minded and I'm just walking in and I'm just trying to take in everything, right? I'm trying to take in what I'm seeing. I am trying to take in the sounds that I'm hearing, might be other people. If I walk around and I'm just keeping my mind open, I am going to inevitably find a piece that just pulls me to it. I don't know why. It does. And then I can give you a more cleaner example of that. There's the painting, I think it's called Moonlight Path, maybe.
Yeah, that is what it's called.
Right.
I know exactly which painting.
So it's it's clearly in the landscape. The landscape is dark. The moon is illuminated. And when I was, and it's just happened not that long ago, I've walked by that piece multiple times, okay? Never really stood out to me, whatever. It's not a gigantic piece. And there are a lot of bigger pieces all around it.
Yeah.
Well, when I walked by it, it reminded me, for whatever reason, one of the things that I find absolutely fascinating and horrifying, and that is anything to do with the woods or swamps or water features at night. I don't know what it is about them. Take me to a river in the daytime, I'm amazed by the beauty of it. Take me to a swamp, no problem. Take me to the woods, love it. At night, it's completely different. When I immediately was drawn to that piece and started feeling about that, started thinking about that, I couldn't help but think about the way, I was brought up, the way a lot of us are brought up, especially in the South, where older father figures, male figures, whatever, if they knew that there was something about that space that terrified, they would push us into that space, right? As this sort of, I don't know, what about Bob, death therapy or something like that?
Yeah. Or just like, you don't know how to swim, so we're just going to throw you in the lake.
Right. So you better learn how to swim or you're just going to drown and we'll get another kid. So all of these feelings they just flooded me. So I, of course, don't want it to be about me. I still want it to be about the piece. And so I'm going to spend time now thinking about those things, but watching and looking at that piece. And I'm going to stand to the right. I'm going to stand to the left. I'm going to stand to the center. I may step back a few. I may walk a little closer, obviously not too close. And I'm going to try different perspectives, and I'm just going to simply write what I'm seeing. Just basic, just notes, right? what I find then when I go back to it, those feelings, that memory, that everything that I had while I stood there, as I start to go through those notes, they're all coming back. And now what I'm end up doing is I end up creating the poem at that point. Now, if I were coming in and bringing a group of people in and to have them sort of figure out and find their own space, I would give them guided questions, things to get them to think about. Like, it's easy for us to say, look at this painting and tell me what you feel, right? And, maybe like, I feel cold. I feel alone. What do you want from me? And this is something that Glenna does very well when she is talking with educators about when they want to do tours and bring students up to the Columbia Museum of Art and think about how to get them to connect and engage with the artwork. Thinking about our senses, right? Because I think so much of what we're seeing, it's the sense of sight. So that's a very pedestrian thing, right? I mean, I can describe you by what you wear, okay? It wouldn't be natural for me to describe you by, I don't know, the way you taste. I mean, I wouldn't know, right? But I could describe you maybe by the way you sound, or
salty,
very salty. He sounds and tastes salty. But like if I'm looking at art again. We're not physically talking about, scratching the paint to see what it sounds like. Or,
yeah, please do not do that.
Do not touch this stuff, okay, guys? But like, if I think about the sense of sight, there's so many associative powers that go along with that, right? If I see blue, I can think about, what does blue taste like? What does blue smell like? What does blue sound like? And that's when my imagination starts to fly. So if I can get people to get past that first initial, all right, we're going to get out of the literal world and we're going to go into the figurative world where you don't have to make sense, all right? And this is all about how you're connecting to what you see here.
I'm really glad you brought up Glenna because we're going to hear from her a little bit. And we're actually, a little surprise for listeners at home, we might actually hear a little bit of her doing one of these trainings that you're talking about as well. But you'll have to listen longer for that. Right now, I will torture all of you with a game, because I brought a game. Can you believe it, Ray? It's been so long since I brought a game.
I know. The torture really is for me, y'all. Y'all are just going to witness this.
All right, Ray. Well, I mentioned that Metropolitan Museum of Art study earlier, and so I'm calling this game Gone in 17 Seconds. So you will see in front of you there is a couple of pieces of paper labeled with numbers. And so what we are going to do, you're not going to flip them over yet. Don't you dare do it, Ray. I see you wanting to. But what we're going to do here is when I say go, you will flip over the first piece of paper.
All right.
And I want you to describe what you see. And you get 17 seconds, and then you are no longer allowed to look at that. And I'm going to ask you some questions on it.
Okay.
So be sure to tell our listeners at home what you're looking at. I'll give you some more details after he gets a chance to check it out. And then we'll ask some questions. We're going to do this with a couple of pieces, and it should be kind of fun. We'll see how you do.
All right.
All right, cool. So you can go ahead and put your hand on the piece of paper and begin.
Okay, it's definitely a still life. I see there's a lot
10 seconds remaining.
There's a lot of grapes, there's raspberries, there's a watermelon that is either
5 seconds.
Been eaten or something terrible has happened to it.
All right, put it away.
All right.
So, to your point, this is Still Life with Fruit by Severin Rosian, whose name I know I mispronounced, so I'm very sorry. To your point, there was fruit. This is a still life with fruit. It's in the name. There are 8 fruit in this painting.
Okay.
Can you name all 8 of these fruit?
Let's see. There was raspberries, grapes, watermelon. Is that a lemon?
Yep.
Was there a pear?
There was no pear.
Okay. Apple?
There is an apple.
Okay.
3 seconds remaining.
Did I say raspberries already?
No.
Okay.
And they're not in there anyway. Do you want me to give you the list?
Yeah, do it.
It is grapes, lemon, apple, peaches, strawberries, watermelon, cherries, and plums.
Oh, okay, yeah. No raspberries in that.
No raspberries. To be fair, the strawberries kind of look like raspberries. I mean, it's interpretive. It is a painting after all. But not bad, not bad. I feel like you got like 6 out of 8. It's like pretty good.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
So good job. I'll give you the point. How about that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But anyway, so let's just move on to the next painting here.
All right.
All right, so let me get the timer set up real quick. Give me a second. All right, and begin.
All right. This one is a portrait of a lady who looks like she is royal. She has a blue dress on. She's kind of got her back to us like she is indifferent to all of us. There is some creepy dude over in the corner coming out of the shadow.
All right, that's all you get.
Awesome.
So that was The Decoy by John Collier, whose name I do think I might have pronounced correctly, but I'm not totally sure.
Sounded better than the first one.
Certainly did. Okay, so you mentioned there is a woman in the center of this painting. She's got a dress on. Can you tell me what the pattern on the dress is?
Is it like a fleur-de-lis?
Ding, 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 ding. Good job. Way to go. Yeah. Fleur-de-lis, you may know it from Mardi Gras. And you mentioned there was someone hiding in the shadows, but there was also something on the floor. Can you name what it was?
I don't think I saw something on the floor. I don't think I had time to see that on the floor.
Ironically, it is the decoy that is named in the painting. It is a red rose, which if you had seen this in person, probably would have been the very first thing you saw. But instead, you saw a really poorly made printout of it that I brought to you. We got 2 more paintings here.
Right.
So let me get the timer going again, and we'll go ahead and begin.
All right. Oh, wow. There's a lot going on in this one. There's angels and little cherubs, maybe. Little fat babies drinking and eating stuff. Bunch of people half naked or naked at a table. And in the background, gosh, this is...
And that's it.
Field. All right.
All right. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
There's a lot going on in there.
That's a tricky one. So that is The Marriage of Thetis, Goddess of the Sea, and King Peleus by Jan Bruegel. I think most of those names were pronounced correctly.
Yeah, sounded good.
I'm getting better. So I got 2 questions for you here. Very first one, you mentioned some naked babies, some cherubs, we might call them. Can you take a stab at how many were in that painting?
Oh, man, there was a lot in that painting. I don't know.
Specifically the ones with wings.
Oh, the ones with wings. I'm going to guess 5.
Even more. It was actually 8.
Oh.
But that's a tough one. Hopefully this next one will be a little easier. Let's see if it caught your eye or not. So in the center of the painting is actually Poseidon. He's got an orange kind of tunic thing around his waist. You know it's him because he's got a trident at his feet. But there's like another little key indicator in this painting that might make you think that, oh, this might be Poseidon. He's sitting on something. Can you tell me what he was sitting on?
An oyster shell?
You were so close. It was a giant fish. Looked like a catfish, maybe?
That's a pretty good guess.
Yeah, so not bad, not bad.
Why would you sit on an oyster shell anyway? Maybe a clam shell, but, you know. All right.
I almost want to give you half a point just for trying, but I know that you didn't see it.
But basically, sitting on a fish is so much better, right? Oh, man.
Oh, I should have brought more paintings. I'm having fun with this. Okay, so we got 1 left.
All right.
So give me 1 second. My timer has disappeared from my phone. Okay, and begin.
Ooh, looks like a coal car. It says Columbia, South Carolina. It's in the foreground. In the background, you see a city landscape with power lines.
5 seconds left.
Water tower, crane, lots of yellows and greens.
And you're done. All right, so you took away my best question, which is where is this located? But I think you figured that one out really quickly.
You can see Columbia on there.
Yeah, so good job. Good job. Yes. I'll give you the point, even though I didn't ask the question. But I do have one other question. There's a lot of colors in this painting, right? Which of these colors is not? Is it blue, red, yellow, or purple?
Ooh. All right. We can, on a 50-50, we can go ahead and take off orange and red and yellow, because I think there's red and yellow in there. blue or purple. I'm coming down to either blue or purple. I think purple is the color.
Correct.
Yes.
That is right. And I should have mentioned to begin with that this is Coal Car by Edmund Yadjin. He was kind of an important Columbia-based painter for a while. He taught at USC for a while, and this is a great painting we have that we really love of his here in our collection. Thank you for playing Gone in 17 Seconds.
Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah, I hope all of you at home enjoyed not seeing any of those pictures. And maybe you can come in and spend more than 17 seconds with them and see what you can find. But in the meantime, we did mention that we wanted to bring in Glenna, so maybe we should go ahead and do that, huh?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's get in, Glenna.
All right. See you later, Ray.
See you, Drew. All right, well, we are here in the studio with Glenna Barlow, who is no stranger to this show, but it has been a while since we've got to sit down and talk. What all are you up to now, Glenna?
Yeah, it's been a minute. We are always busy. We're always thinking about the next exhibition and what's coming down the pike, but we're also starting to think about different ways to approach the art. Part of what we want to do is maybe infuse more of the work we're doing with teachers into what we do when we actually have students here, which makes sense, right?
Right. Well, I mean, and ultimately, what are we talking about here? I mean, we're talking about getting folks to come into the museum and to have a different experience than perhaps what they think they're supposed to do in an art museum, right? You know, so if you're not an art historian, that's okay, because there's plenty here for you.
Right.
And so one of the things that really was sort of eye-opening, I think, in the very first time that you were doing one of these, I call them workshops. What do you call them?
Workshops.
Workshops, okay.
Yeah.
I was listening to you talk, and I was thinking to myself, like, did Glenna have my notebook? I mean, because there are things that you were telling them about, you know, how they can approach art and things that they can look for beyond just what stands out immediately when they walk up, or getting them to think about depth of field, even with a two-dimensional object, which is exactly what a lot of poets are going to do when they stand in front of art, or getting folks to write poetry about art. I believe it's called VTS. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what that means, or what that spells, and then what that means?
Sure. So VTS is something that's been around a couple of decades now, and a lot of museums have adopted this in various fashions, but it stands for Visual Thinking Strategies. And it's one approach. We try a lot of different techniques when we're kind of messing around in the galleries and just having fun looking at art. But this is one method that's really kind of tried and true, and it's got a lot of good evidence to back up all of the good things that it can accomplish in students. Everything from building critical thinking skills to building empathy to just being able to listen and understand better. It's great for English language learners. But essentially, it's just a really open-ended way of looking at a work of art, or really any complex object or image. And so it's really just opening things up and breaking things down so that there is no barrier. There's no feeling of I have to know something before I can speak about this piece. It really just opens it up to say, well, what do you see here? What's going on here? And it's really up to all the participants to decide what's going on, how to make meaning from that based on the visual evidence that they have.
Sure. And I think one of the ways that getting writers involved into it and having them spend time with it along that same approach, but to get them to find aspects within the piece that they can feel, without obviously physically touching.
Yeah,
we don't want that, right? So if you see colors, like, if the dominant color is red, how does that make you feel? If you see fruit that's on a plate and the fruit is starting, it looks like it's overripe and it's gotten, it's like some mold, or it's starting to shrivel. What does that make you think of? And then when you think about that, how does that make you feel? It's not a therapeutic session by any means, but if art is going to pull us into that, and ultimately that's what we're talking about here, right? I mean, that you can't just walk up, see it for 18 seconds, walk away and feel something. And so I love by getting them to not feel like they have to have a level of expertise, because really they don't. Find the things that stands out to them for whatever reason. There's no right or wrong. And then thinking about that to then connect to how that makes them feel.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are always proponents of anything that makes you slow down and really stop and look at something. That's kind of what we're training everybody to do when we bring them in for a guided tour in some ways. Yeah, we just want you to slow down. And that's in such a, everyone says this, but in such a fast-paced world, like right. It's not an easy thing to do always. It's can feel like a small little rebellion to be like, no, I'm going to look at this object for 20 minutes. And it sounds crazy, but it shouldn't.
Right.
Because someone spent, how long making that, right?
Exactly.
Like months, years maybe. They thought about every brushstroke and where every object was going to be and what color it was going to be. And then we look at it for 15 seconds and we're like, yeah, I got the idea. Yeah. No, that's crazy. You didn't really see it, right? And we feel rushed. I totally understand that impetus, right? Like I go to lots of museums and I'm trying to see as much as I can. So I'm rushing through too. But we know that's not the best way to really get to know something and to really see it. That's why we love having people come to the museum, but also come back and feel like you don't have to see it all. You can just go to one gallery.
Right.
Just go to one piece.
Yeah.
And you can come back later.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you can come back to the same piece.
Yeah.
That's, I think, something that, we've really tried to have our listeners, some have been to the museum, probably been to the museum several times. We could probably mention a piece here, maybe one of the more iconic pieces in the museum. They've seen it. They know it. But have they, stood to the right? Have they experienced it while they were hungry? Have they experienced it while they're full? But all of these different things change and shape the way we see and feel things. And that's what I love about it. Even though somebody had taken all of that time to create it, it has survived the test of time by just taking some time with it. Every time you come to it, you're going to find new things that you can connect to.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. We, with our docents, recently just did this kind of slow looking exercise where it really wasn't about teaching them anything per se. It was just about kind of facilitating that experience and seeing what that feels like. And so we went to a piece that's, it's a Hudson River School style piece. It's a pretty big one. It's right when you walk in the door into that gallery. So we see it all the time. I've walked past it. I've used it on tours a million times. And every single person came out of that experience having seen something new, having learned a new thing about that piece, having realized something they didn't before.
I thought it was interesting. The last time I shared this piece with a group, I had looked at this piece countless times with groups and by myself. But it was a child who immediately went for that waterfall in the back, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't noticed that." So, he must have seen it for maybe 2 minutes,
yeah. A piece like this is so rich. You can always find little details that you never noticed before. Did anyone see something that they didn't notice?
The vines. When she mentioned the vines, I hadn't seen them.
Okay, like the vines on the trees.
Great. See those.
the little dogs in the meadow. I had never noticed.
Yeah, those little tiny dogs. I had never seen this teeny tiny figure.
What dogs? I thought it was a rock.
These two, the white and the black.
Oh, I thought it was a
They're
rock.
playing.
I think they're dogs. Yeah.
Like that was a nice bowl. I'm into rocks, so I collect them.
And all we did was get in front of it. And I mean, I had them do a few things like, okay, step back and now come closer. You were sitting over here. Now sit on the other side. Close your eyes. What can you picture from that piece? What stands out to you? What parts are a little fuzzier? So just like little small things, but every single person came out of that either saying, wow, I have a whole different approach to this piece now. I have a deeper appreciation for it, or right. I didn't like it, but now I at least have questions about it. Maybe it's still not my favorite piece, but I'm thinking about all of these questions and ideas that I didn't have before.
So it's just the aspiration of the people at that time. This is what was idyllic to them.
Yes. Well, they were selling it, right? It's a Hudson River artist.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't like it. I think it's boring.
No. Oh, that's interesting.
No, to me it's dead.
Oh, okay. Say more about that.
It's everything is perfect.
It's too perfect.
It's too mannered. It's too. There's
no life. There's no life in it.
Yeah, there's no drama in it.
You've got a happy personality. You want things coming out from
That's what we want.
But you can add the drama, because that's what I like, drama.
And so to me it is, it's like a still life, only it's expansive. So what I was thinking is, like, if we could ask the kids, if you had little kids, because they'd get really antsy for this, like if we could even say we're going to go on a hike, how could you go on a hike? And which way would you think we should start our hike? What would we wear? And then as we go around, I was thinking that maybe we could figure out what we would wear if we line up in each one of these paintings, maybe. Or what does it feel like? Get into the seasons, the weather, the things that they do know about.
I didn't really facilitate much more than try this, try that. But we got to, okay, well, what is this land? Who owns this? Was this the artist's first time seeing this? Or, did he take some liberties? Did he change some things? We have all these extra questions, and art doesn't always answer all those questions, but the beauty is that it, makes you think of all these new questions.
Well, yeah, and the beauty of it is that it doesn't answer all the questions, right? Because if we got the answers to the questions, then that's it. We can move on.
Yeah,
and,
what's the fun in that?
There's no fun in that at all. And so I think the ultimate takeaway, and what we're trying to impart to our listeners with this episode, is the idea of taking time, which, of course, almost seems next to impossible these days. As you pointed out, it is a fast-paced world, and we're doing good sometimes to hang on. But the museum really does lend itself to allow one to slow down, to think about pieces. It's, first of all, a beautiful space, but it's a quiet space. It's a place where you can think. So what would be just some sort of general tips that you would give? You're just your average listener is going to walk in. Maybe they've been to the museum before, maybe they haven't.
Sure. All right. So if you want to go into the museum and have kind of a slow-looking experience, what I would say is, first of all, drop any notion that you have to spend a certain amount of time in the museum. You have to see a certain number of things. Just forget all of that. Just go in with the expectation that you're going to have an experience and you're going to try to dig deeper into at least one piece. So there's a lot of ways you can do that. Some people go immediately to something that they're drawn to or that they, for some reason, gravitate to, and that's great. You've already got a little bit of something that's piqued your interest. But what I thought was interesting in the exercise we did with our docents earlier is that sometimes the more fruitful conversations come out of a piece that you maybe don't really like. And sometimes unpacking that is even more interesting than, I like this because it's pretty, or I like it because it's peaceful, it makes me feel calm. That's fine. But if there's something you don't like, or if there's a reason you're not drawn to it, why is that? And maybe unpacking and unraveling that is even more interesting. So you can go, any number of ways with that. But what I would say is try to change your perspective a little bit. So maybe start looking at it farther away, see what jumps out at you, move a little closer, move to the side. I've seen kids lie down on the floor to get a different perspective. Hey, that's great too. So just change up the way that you're looking at something and don't go in with the expectation that you have to know anything about it. I would say maybe don't even look at the label. Who made it? What it's called, that doesn't really matter to the experience that you're having with it right now. So just go in with an open mind, see what questions might come to your head. If you have someone with you that you can ask those questions of, or you can have a conversation with, that can be really fantastic. I saw that with our docents because it wasn't just looking at the piece, it was looking at it together and saying, well, I noticed this when I saw it, or I really thought that felt more this way. A lot of them had conflicting ideas about a piece or feelings about how they, the emotions that they had while looking at it. And that is so valuable too, for any age, for anyone to just realize, there's not one universal way to see anything. We're all going to come at this from a different perspective with our own experiences. If we're hungry that day,
Right.
So yeah, I would say if you have someone there to talk to, it's an even richer experience. You can kind of tease those questions out and see how they see something versus how you see it. But just go in with an open mind. Don't have a, prescribed amount of time you have to spend. But if you have the time, just linger a little longer and see what happens. And then, leave when you're done. Cool.
The Columbia Museum of Art, a slow-moving, slow-looking experience in a fast-paced world.
There you go.
Glenna Barlow is the Curator of Education at the Columbia Museum of Art. If you'd like to learn more about the art on view, Why not try out a public tour? The CMA offers a host of options for docent-led gallery tours each month, including collection and special exhibition tours, stroller tours for families and caregivers with babies 2 years and under, and Gladys's Gang for toddlers and preschoolers. You can find out more information about all our tours at our website at columbiamuseum.org. Coming up,
find a piece of art here that you think that you could do, and like why. What do you think the process behind creating this is? Because that's often a reaction people have to contemporary art is, oh, I could do this.
Evelyn Berry, after this.
Hey y'all, Producer Drew here. If you're listening to this podcast, I bet you already understand how important arts and culture is to your community. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask you to consider becoming a member of the Columbia Museum of Art. Memberships do more than keep our doors open. They put art to work for our community, connecting visitors from all walks of life with unforgettable creative experiences that free our imaginations and bring us closer together. Your membership helps keep art accessible by supporting our free access days like First Thursdays. You'll help continue the mission of this museum by supporting educational programs for people of all ages, and you'll also help us continue to bring free programs like Binder Podcast to the public. Of course, you'll get plenty of perks as well, including discounts and pre-registration for camps and art classes, and unlimited free admission to the CMA and over 150 museums across the Southeast. By becoming a CMA member, you're not just benefiting yourself, you're uplifting the entire community. So join us in sustaining the art that sustains us all. Learn more about CMA membership on our website, columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
Meet me on Main, where song sculpts evening into painted dusk, shapes the husk of sorrow into honey, where art inspires and doors open wide. Tonight, we gather to breathe together. Meet me at Boyd Plaza. Meet me on Main, in rain, wind, fresh spring, or humid summer. We will bloom as artists without constraints. We will seek catharsis in guitar licks. We kick drum, we snare clash, we cymbal crash, we funk, we punk, we thump, we banjo pluck, we food truck, we drink beer, we sing, joy drunk. We bliss dance, kiss, long as evening allows. Tonight, we belong. Transplants and locals, we advance the agenda of expansive inclusion, find in each other artistic breakthroughs. Through this magic, we make ourselves anew. Hi, I'm Evelyn Berry. I'm a poet, an editor, and a performer. I'm the author of the debut poetry collection, Slut, which came out at the beginning of 2024.
Evelyn, it is great to have you on. I have wanted to have you on for a while. It's been a hard time for us sometimes to connect back and forth, and so many different things going on. I think, first of all, now you're in Columbia, so that's fantastic. But you're no stranger to the Columbia Museum of Art, working with ekphrastic poetry. And so we wanted to have you on and to be able to talk about some of the cool stuff you've done over in Boyd Plaza. And our listeners may not know this, but Evelyn is the first person that we have had for our Read Around series, which is a brand new series we've started out at the Columbia Museum of Art, having writers and poets come in and share their work. Some of it they may have written based off of the artwork. Some of them may have had work that they've already written, and it just seems that the artwork is responding to in different ways. But it is a guided tour of sorts where the poet and writer gets to read their work by the works of art, and we can sort of experience all of that together. And Evelyn was the first one that did it, and it was fantastic. So welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to chat about poetry and art and the connection between them.
So let's talk first about some of the stuff that you've been doing in Boyd Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
The few times when I do get on social media, I'll see somewhere there's a picture of you with a typewriter somewhere downtown Columbia or in Boyd Plaza. Talk a little bit about some of the work that you've been doing there.
Yeah, sure. So I used to, a couple of years ago, do a lot of typewriter poetry, which is a just way of saying that I sat up with a typewriter and offer to write people poems on any kind of topic of their choice. I'm starting to bring this back because I find it to be a way to connect directly with people and also provide poetry directly to people who might be interested. Even people who might not be huge fans of poetry, I think can connect when they get to have a poem that's written just for them. A couple of months ago, as First Thursday was starting up again in the spring, I joined all the folks at Columbia Museum of Art and First Thursday on Main at Boyd Plaza to write some poems on my typewriter. So I got to write some poems, also wrote a special poem called Meet Me on Main, kind of specially for that event as well.
Now, when people come up, I guess it puts you a little bit on the spot because you don't know what they're going to ask you to do, right? If they, can you write me a poem about my dog? Can you write me a poem about, football, whatever? And I love the challenge of that, right? I mean, because you don't have a whole lot of time to sit there and think and wait for a bolt of inspiration to hit you. You're inventing almost simultaneously. What has been sort of the wildest experience that you've had where somebody has come up and wanted you to write a poem?
You get a lot of people, people want to turn to poetry during times of celebration and also times of grief. So often I will get people saying, hey, this weekend, my daughter's getting married. Write me a poem I could read at her reception. That's a lot of pressure to be put on the spot and to write in 15 minutes. But I've also written, elegies for lost dogs or lost family members. And I think on one hand, there's an impulse to say no to some of those requests because they're really heavy. But I also know how much it means to people. I also try to be cognizant that I'm going to be extremely self-critical of anything I write within 10 to 15 minutes. But to most people, as long as they have a connection to it or it speaks to them and they like it, then we've done something and connected through poetry. And the more that I do it, the easier it becomes.
Sure. And then, of course, doing it on a typewriter, right? So what kind of typewriter do you use?
Yeah, I now have a Royal Classic, which is basically a recreation of like an older Royal typewriter. So it's a manual typewriter, but made in the 21st century. So it's a lot easier to upkeep and find parts for. In the past, I've used a variety of different typewriters, and I changed them out because this one's quite light compared to most older typewriters. So if I'm lugging it to events, it's way easier. I
would imagine, the old Royal ones too, especially. I mean, that's a boat anchor you're carrying around.
They are super, super hefty. I also got a pink typewriter, just because, it's something that attracts people to you.
Sure.
The more that I do it, the more kind of fun things I bring. So sometimes I have, in addition to the typewriter poetry, like framed poems that they can read so they can get a sense of like who I am. I might have books for sale. I also sometimes do like mystery poems and envelopes that they can buy and get just so that they can interact in some way, even if they don't have time to wait for me to write something for them.
One of the things that I love that you were doing fairly recently was encouraging folks to come into the galleries and tying that in with what you're doing out in the plaza. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I sometimes people also see a typewriter and they also are then wanting to touch it and write poetry of their own. So I wanted to make sure to provide that opportunity. And since we were in Boyd Plaza and it was on a First Thursday, you have free admission to Columbia Museum of Art. So I created poetry prompts for some of the paintings and artwork in general here at the museum so that people could take the prompt, go inside, find whatever piece of art, and write about it directly. I find that poetry is a great way to like think about one's relationship to an art piece. So, for example, these prompts, some of them were about very specific pieces of art. So I was saying, what do you think is happening in this piece of art? Describe it. Or maybe asking them to find something that speaks to them emotionally, reminds them of their childhood, anything like that. So that's always really fun.
And that is so cool. And a lot of what we've talked about in this particular episode about, spending time with art, that most people are just a few seconds and they're on to the next piece. And anything we can get them to just stop for a moment. And you don't have to have the art degree to stop and then figure it out, but just talking about helping them to see how they can personally relate to what they're seeing. And yes, poetry is just a natural conduit for that. And of course, we got you out of the plaza and got you into the museum, which is a little bit cooler these days, for the Read Around series. And we had a fantastic turnout. It was amazing what you did. I loved how we went through each of the, sort of the galleries where you were the pieces that you had written about or had poems that responded back and forth in interesting kind of ways. But then you also talked about the artwork. And then you did something that I thought was so clever. When you were finished reading, you said, spend some time here. I'm going to go over here, but you spend some time here, and then we'll come over to the next piece, and then I'll start up again. And it gave people a chance to sort of think about what they had heard, what they had seen, and then even internalize it as they started to look at some other pieces also in the gallery. What was your experience first? And it's going to be one of my classic Ray McManus. Here's a question that's going to have 3 questions in it. So first, talk about how you approached Read Around series. Was it work that you had created or for that, or was it work that you had? Because I know that Grief Slut has poems in there that works of art in the Columbia Museum of Art inspired. And then as you thought about how you wanted to work that through into a tour of sorts, as you think about order and arrangement, how did you, what were some of the strategies to that?
Yeah. So for some context, back in late 2019, Ray asked me to be part of the Write Around series.
That's right.
During which I wrote maybe 10 to 12 poems based on artwork here. And I really wanted to do something at Columbia Museum of Art when Grief Slut came out because it was so tied to that project. A lot of the poems, sometimes in slightly different forms, ended up being in Grief Slut. So that was the original impetus for it. And I wanted to create a tour. But thinking through that, I wanted it to feel like somewhat a typical museum tour in that it had a good flow. I actually used to work in a history museum, so I'm no stranger to like speaking to crowds and moving around and thinking of like the story I'm telling as we're moving through a space. And I pretty intentionally came to the museum one day, maybe about 2 months before this event happened. And I went through the museum, and first of all, I went and made sure to see what art pieces I had already written about that were still on display, because the Columbia Museum of Art's collection is always changing, or rather, what is on display is changing. So some of those pieces of art that I'd written about were no longer on display. Some of them were moved. So I kind of made a note of what was where. And then I went through and tried to choose at least one piece of art in each room that spoke to me that I could hypothetically talk about. I did realize that, there's so many rooms here that it would be impossible to write about something in each room. That might be like a 3-hour tour.
Right.
So instead, I thought about how to make the actual physical tour around the museum to start on one side and cycle through to not every room, but sometimes every other room. And so I started to write about some pieces that were brand new to me and some pieces that I had really loved for a long time. An example of that is there's a painting in here. It is of this goddess Eos. And I've always really loved this painting and the story behind it because it's also right next to an art piece by her husband, which I really love. And I actually have a print of that hanging in my house. So I see it all the time. So I thought, of course I should write about it because this is a painting that I feel like I've thought about and seen so often. Similarly, I want to write not just about the experience of like looking at the art and determining like, okay, this is the narrative, but also about the experience of being in the museum. So there also were poems about the act of looking at art. I wrote about my first date with my partner here at the museum and kind of that experience of looking at a particular art piece and sitting on a particular bench, because that too is part of the museum going experience. And I ended with a poem about the chandelier that was created by Antonio Salviati, which is my favorite piece in the museum, and a poem that was published in a couple of different places and eventually in Slut. And it's about my relationship to art and thoughts behind my own life and kind of the artwork that I encounter.
Cool. Well, I think that would be a good place for us to hear one.
Eos, after Mary Evelyn Pickering de Morgan. Once, the goddess of dawn cried out, forlorn. Her son cast into dirt beyond the walls of Troy, Achilles' sword drawn through his chest, his soul gone, replaced with a feathered flock. Her tears poured graceless as swans, like a vase overflowing with morning dew, until grief bloomed new gardens. Describe to me the weight of this. Morning replenishes the earth, ushers soil into rebirth, new river traced from the boy's doomed blue veins. What is a song worth without its wound? Let me, for once, taste paradise without the tinge of blood. Let me glimpse the cusp of dawn without the flood of night.
I love the direction that your poetry goes into. I mean, there's a sonic density that you do work very well. That's something I love to do in poetry, is in cramming nouns together and creating something different, new. We hear that as obviously in the Meet Me on Main. You do a lot of it there. You know, while you are moving into the directions that you're moving into poetry, and only because I think this is the question I love to ask writers, and you mentioned a little bit of it. When you are looking at a piece of art and you're wanting to write a poem, and there are the moves, right? There are the things that you feel super comfortable with and how you are going to compose a poem. How much is it a give and take when you are trying to write ekphrastic poetry?
With ekphrastic poetry, I think of it as the sort of prompt that allows me to create new work when I'm unable to create new work, if that makes sense. Yeah, so absolutely. If I'm blocked, I go to art museums, and I do this everywhere I travel as well. I try to go and find something to write about in a museum just because it forces me to think differently. And the other thing that I like to do, and I've done this for a couple of different pieces, is think about not just what the painting is, but how the artist created it, and think about what form or what technique I can use in my own composition to emulate that artistic expression. So a couple of years ago, like Columbia Museum of Art had like the Jackson Pollock exhibition for a while. So like that could create a really interesting kind of poem. I did something similar with Pat Steer's painting Small Silver Water Splash, and it uses the aleatoric method, which is a fancy way of saying she randomly is drizzling paint on a page. And so the poem itself, when it was first written, was written in such a way that I cut up all of the lines and then drew them randomly out of a cup in order to read it. So it felt more random. In a similar way, there was another poem that was inspired by a Frank Gehry chair. I don't think it's on display right now, but the way the chair looks, it kind of bends into itself. So I wanted a poem that would like literally start over when you got to the end. So I think when you are looking at a piece of art, you can think of, in what way does this artistic technique remind me of a poetic technique I can bring? And also, how might I be able to like push myself into doing something a little weird or a little bit different that is going to create something that otherwise I might not create if I am simply in my own kind of mind or relying on all of the old tricks.
Well, I love that. And I love the risk that you're willing to take for the poem. And I think that honestly is what I'm often drawn to your poetry for, because it's always going to take me to a place that I wasn't expecting to go. And it reveals something that I don't know. And, and those are two, for me personally, such important markers for good poetry. And you sure do write good poetry, Evelyn. What's coming down the pike? Anything new that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm working on a couple of things. I am kind of at the tail end of an elongated book tour. So this month and next month, I'm taking some time off before book festival season and getting back on the road. I am working on a second poetry collection, which is coming together much faster than the first one. Yeah. That is tentatively titled Tea for Tea. And I'm also working on the first draft of a novel, because I think that's where I want to kind of aim my energies as well, is some fiction as well. Cool.
Good. Well, I think all of our listeners are going to be excited to see what comes next. And certainly, they should pick up a copy of Grief Slut. It is a great collection. And by all means, come out to the Columbia Museum of Art, and you might just catch Evelyn out here with a typewriter, or you might just see her walking around in the galleries. And if you do, say hello, but don't stick around because she is writing. Evelyn, thank you so much for coming and being a part of our show.
Thank you for having me.
Evelyn Berry is a trans Southern writer, editor, and educator. She's the author of Grief Slut, published by Sundress Publications in 2024, and Buggery, published by Bateau Press in 2020, winner of the Boom Chapbook Prize. She is also a recipient of a 2023 National Endowment for the Arts Poetry Fellowship. You can find out more about Evelyn Berry by going to her website at evelynberrywriter.com. So earlier in this episode, we were talking about, how I take time with art and how I use that sometimes to be the catalyst for some of my poetry. And one of the particular pieces that we were talking about is The Moon Path by Elliot Dangerfield. When I came to that piece, I could not help but be drawn to the image in it because I found it beautiful. And the thing that really stood out to me that really set up the impetus for the poem wasn't actually in the artwork, but a sound that I would have thought that I heard if I were standing in that place. So, as a kid growing up in the South and growing up in the woods, there were just places you didn't go to at night. You didn't go to the woods at night. You didn't go to the swamps at night. They were scary as hell to go into. And because you hear things moving. And so all I kept thinking about was how many things I would hear splashing. And so then I started thinking about splashes. And then I started thinking about dark splashes. And somehow or another, I came up with this poem called The Butchers. We crawled our way out of the bog. We were kids scared of bad dreams. We were told the swamps were haunted and the woods at night take everything. First prey, then predator, then hope for a full moon so that we could make out the contours of what was before us. We were curious. We stepped forward, surveyed the chorus of bullfrog and dark splashes. And some of us were commended for being brave. We stepped wider, moved farther away, where we could feel our feet sinking until we disappeared back into the water. All those years ago. All those bodies. You've been listening to Binder, a production of the Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron, with special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about CMA exhibitions and programs, visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org. Binder podcast, Pink Floyd, The Wall. It's all the same. All right, here we go.
Oh, God.